Welcome to the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast with best-selling author Fawn Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Come here weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network.
Hi, I'm Fawn Germer.
And I'm Michelle Brigman.
And this is the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about work and careers.
Ugh.
Okay, wait a minute. It's talking about when it gets to that point, you've got to do something and you're not doing it and what you should be doing. And so with us today, we've got Melissa Maheux, who is an executive recruiter for Russell Reynolds, and she's going to help us sort it all out.
Hallelujah.
So, say what?
Nice to be here.
Yeah. So, what do you tell people when they realize they've got to make a change and they aren't doing it? They're just stuck.
Yeah, the first question I like to ask folks is, tell me, what are you looking for in an ideal role? I really ask people to think about what they need. Most people don't always say, hey, Melissa, I'm stuck. That's not always the first conversation, right? And it takes a little bit of probing.
Well, you ever notice how many people don't do anything just because of one thing is that they've got to do their resume, and it's so intimidating when they're thinking about it and they just don't do it. But it's not hard, and it's not hard to get going on it. Just decide you're going to go. Yeah.
That's exactly right. I laugh because in my experience, women are 3 times less likely to respond for a recruiter's call. And I ask myself, what's that all about? Like, I'm here to help you. If you have a draft of a resume, send it over. If it's terrible, I'll let you know. So it's interesting to hear you say that, because you couldn't be more right.
Did you start out as a recruiter or?
That's a great question. I started as a teacher, 7th grade life science at in Atlanta public schools. So I've changed my career 3 times now.
What was the second?
I pivoted. I went to business school, and then I joined IBM, and I started as a technical role there. And funny enough, in 2 years in, realized I didn't like it, that I needed to do something different. And so I joined the sales team, and I spent about 10 years in sales and technology sales at Google, at IBM. And then I got restless again. I reinvented myself one more time. And that's when I found Russell Reynolds.
Well, first of all,
just good for you. Good for you for just recognizing your need for change. What a great person to be talking to our audience about this.
Right, because a lot of people know that they should do something, but they don't quite have the courage. And those are really dramatic changes you've made.
Very dramatic, very different. And it always started with having a conversation with myself. Right? People would say, oh, you're good at this, or you should do that. But that doesn't give me energy.
Well, so going back to what you said earlier about women are 3 times less likely to respond to a recruiter's call. So whose side are you on? Whose side is the recruiter on? And where do we need a mindset shift about the relationship we can have with a recruiter?
I can't speak for every recruiter, but I will say it's good to think about recruiters as being your ally, your voice in the market. So if you think about what we do, we have hundreds of conversations a week with some of the senior most executives in the world. And our purpose is to improve the way the world is led through leadership. So if you're a person who, like Fawn says, hey, I don't even know how to get started. Well, guess who the best person to call is or talk to is? A recruiter. That's what we do all day. We help people navigate change. And that change just so happens to be career change. So I would think of us very simply, Michelle, as an extra voice to help with the change.
So that's awesome because I see you thinking, Fawn. I see you thinking.
I just wonder what's the difference between that and someone who's like a speaking booking agent, because those agents, they've got an event, they want to get a speaker for it. I want to get the event. They have me do it, but they're pitching 10 people and they really don't care which of those 10 people gets it, just as long as one of them does it, because then they get paid. Is that the same way this goes?
I would say, I would put that back of you. Have you ever interviewed for a job?
Yeah.
Was there competition?
Yeah.
There's always competition. So yes, is the short answer. We're hired to bring forward the best candidates for a said position. And while I understand your point of view, it's also part of the way our world works, right?
But it's just if she says whose side you're on, it's really the recruiter's probably on the recruiter's side, right?
Well, there's different kinds of recruiters. I would say the recruiter is in the market on behalf of their client in our situation, right? So if you are a client and said, hey, you really need to find someone who can do the best set design, we would go out to the market and look for the people who could do the absolute best set design, and ultimately the decision is yours.
Yeah. So it's bringing in the best people for them to make the best decision on who is the right fit.
That's right. And then a portion of that is also educating the market on behalf of a client, right? On why it's such a great opportunity and what's different about an opportunity, with one company versus another. And so sometimes we, challenge people who maybe have a great pedigree in one area, but we say, hey, have you ever thought about owning a P&L or actually, stepping out of tech and into another function? And so those conversations can be interesting and sort of get people out of their comfort zone, doing something new. And that's where we really get to be advisory to our clients to say, you want a head of AI engineering and you want a luminary, but have you thought about some other possibilities? So it's truly advisory on both sides, I would say.
Who are you interested in? I mean, what level of people and how do they reach you?
That's a great question. So at Russell Reynolds, we're one of the 5 Shrek firms, if you will. So we are focused primarily at the vice president and above level. There's an exception to every rule. We do a lot of CEO succession work as well. And that we have a broader development offering. So typically officer and above level across industry and across function.
So for people who aren't qualified, and let's just give some general advice, what does it take in this current market to do this as painlessly and quickly as possible?
Yeah, such a good question. So I'm helping someone on their resume right now, and the best thing you can do is articulate what you've been able to deliver. So when we start to look at your resume and it says things like part of a strategy to do XYZ, tell us the value. What did you accomplish and how did you do it? I know people can do situation, behavior, impact, but I would add on a learning. I built this business and, oh, by the way, here's what I learned. Or quantify what you did. Those are the things that really will distinguish you, and tell why. Tell why you make decisions. So often you just say, oh, I decided to do this. But if you actually can get to the heart of why you made a decision, it can help recruiters understand you better and get at the things that might not come through on a resume.
Well, I know, you and I connected because I was a reference for someone that was going through looking for a job, right? With you all had contacted and then you were looking for a reference. And I know I got off that phone call. Obviously, we totally bonded and I left talking to you. But it was interesting because, you asked some really tough questions. And what it left me with was an appreciation for the care you were taking in understanding this candidate and understanding the stickiness they would have with this company and what would be most likely, what would be risks that would keep them from staying, right? And I felt like, okay, you're really spending time trying to figure out, is this going to be a good fit? And are they going to get those things there? Because you mentioned something earlier. You said, what's your ideal job look like? So it was more than just getting a body in the seat, but being able to find the linkage between what they want, what's that ideal role, what is the company really needing, and then making sure those things are coming together. So how important then is it for that candidate to be really forthcoming and honest with you during those conversations? And what should they be vulnerable, be transparent about in those conversations to stack the odds in their favor that they're going to find a good job, next career move?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll pick up on something you said about what should they be honest and authentic about. And I would say as much as possible, and in support and the service of, getting your role. And we've all seen scenarios where it's just not a fit, right? Where you say, this is the thing I wanted, but this isn't a fit. So if you fake it up front, I think you're setting yourself up for failure on the back end, right? And so when we do an assessment of a candidate as much of who they are and what their skill sets are and how well they match, right? And depending on the client, there's culture, there's economic pressures, right? There's who are you amongst this peer group? So there's a lot of factors, which is why our clients hire us to help them move forward. I would say being as authentic and clear as possible. And in the case of when we met Michelle, it was very obvious that, this candidate had made some very quick progressions, and we had to sort of wrap our arms around that quickly. Her authenticity, her very clearness is one of the reasons why she landed the role, because she was able to say very succinctly, this didn't serve me anymore. I made this change and other moves. I just spoke with a woman the other day. She said, I had to move twice because I had a young 6-month-old and I couldn't be on calls, early in the morning anymore. I couldn't do the job that way. So it's our work. The onus is on us to really figure out why has someone moved or what's their motivation. And that's a really big part of the work. Did I answer your question?
You did. And I'm thinking about just how many men and women you're talking to on any given day. What are some of the biggest misses specific to women? Like, what are some of your observations about the difference in talking to candidates that are men versus women? And what would be some learnings?
Yeah. Well, there's sort of the old adage that women are promoted based on historical performance and men are promoted based on potential. Have you heard that one before?
I've heard that before.
Yeah. And so I think it's important. I coach all candidates to have a balanced point of view, right? And whether you present as gregarious and forthright and you take the call first, the onus is making sure that they have the credibility and the accomplishment to back that up. Another thing I will share is often I take off my recruiter hat and I go into coach mode and I'll say, let's talk a little bit about what you're going to step into. The best thing you can do on a Zoom call is pause yourself. The number one feedback we get is the candidate talked too much. I couldn't get a word in edgewise. So you have to stop and say, okay, play a game of ping pong. I tell all my candidates this. Pass the ball. Fawn, you said you wanted to talk about 3 things. Well, I did this, this, and this. Which one makes sense to you to talk about first? Pause. Breathe. Right? Versus just the soliloquy that never ended. It's never going to get you the job, right? I think the candidates, gender agnostic, the candidates who are willing to take that feedback and actually put it into practice do best. I think that being open to feedback, and going back to what you said, if you think about how many people recruiters talk to on a daily basis, we have a pretty solid sample size. So listen to the recruiter. And if they're not giving you feedback, ask them for feedback because they know. And so it's like the biggest miss if you get to talk to a recruiter and you don't ask them. I'll say, hopefully they're going to give feedback, but I don't know if that answered your question, but those are some things that came to mind just in terms of how people navigate executive search. It is very different from interviewing directly with a company. I like to tell my candidates I'm their Sherpa through a process, right? Like, let me guide you. Let me tell you what's ahead. Call me if you need help. So maybe I'm different than others, though, because as Fawn mentioned, I haven't been doing this my whole life.
Because most of our listeners are not in executive search. They're just in search.
Yeah.
And so we need to know a little more about the universe of what is out there. And, the first thing being the realization that they've got to take action. They're settling for something that's not feeling right inside of them, and they want to do what you did, which is make a change.
Wow.
So, how do they do that? I mean, do they get jobs online if they don't have a good network? I mean, where do they go, and how do they do this?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a little bit of pre-work to be done. And this is in part how I've done this. And it started with, I like to say, awareness precedes change. And the only way you change is by actually changing. Right. And there's a great theory called the James Lang theory that supports that, which is like, just move. This is what's behind fake it till you make it. So the homework is have a hard conversation with yourself. Like, are you happy? What do you love? What don't you love? Right? When I was a kid, I stocked shelves in a health food store growing up. I very quickly learned that I wanted to work at the register. I loved people. I wanted to talk to them. I wanted to engage. I wanted to be like, oh, you found that special. I knew it in that moment at 15 that I needed to have a role where I could talk to people. So I would challenge people number one. Think back, no matter who you are, what you do, where have you gotten energy? And think of it and write it down. Have your list of things that you're like, this is actually what I love. And the next piece of work is thinking about, okay, where could you do that more? What might a job look like? Because going into it blind and going into a role that's just going to suck the life out of you isn't, we deserve to enjoy what we do, right? So that's the first step. And then it's building a team. Networking is still important. Understanding who does what you want to do or you think you want to do. Picking up the phone, asking, using a tool like LinkedIn to figure out, oh gosh, I'm second degree connection from Fawn. I've wanted to write a book too. She's done it. Maybe she'd have a conversation with me. The only shot you miss is the one you don't take, right? So
true.
Does that help solve?
Yeah. Now, but do people get jobs online, or is that a black hole?
They do get jobs online. Absolutely.
And what about older people who are applying and say that the algorithm kind of kicks them out?
It's a good question. I don't know that I can say that the algorithm kicks you out, but there are always things like keywords you can focus on and you can build into your LinkedIn profile. And if you think about matching keywords with a job spec, this is simple, but a lot of people don't do it. Having a generic resume is okay, but if you're applying online for a job, absolutely tailor your resume. Make sure that you show that you have the minimum qualifications for the role. What will happen, for example, if it requires a master's and you don't have one, you might not get moved forward. That's less about the algorithm and just about the threshold for the role. So be mindful about that, right? And keep going.
I had advice on this topic. I had advice once that said your job, if you're applying online, your goal is to make sure that you're the first resume that shows up in the search results. And you do that by combing through and understanding those keywords and making sure they're incorporated, period. So that was a different shift. Instead of look for the keywords, but it was like, no, I have to make sure that my resume pops up first because I have the best matches to what's being listed in the job description.
But the problem with that, and is that in studies have shown this, is that the more you tailor it toward keywords, the less readable it is once it winds up in someone's hands. So you've got a keyword proficient resume that's not in English.
Well,
so
it could be like a summary, or it could be, I mean, it doesn't have to be you're forcing words that don't make sense in a sentence. There's a lot of ways to.
Yeah, no, that they said that's probably the biggest mistake people make is that they get in there and they're like, oh, I got to use these words that were in this ad, in the ad here, and I got to repeat all of that. And it looks like you've got everything there, but it's just not effective.
I love what you mentioned earlier about going inside and kind of doing some introspection on what it is that what is it you enjoy that fuels you. I crack up because, I was going to college. I wanted to be a pharmacist, I thought, because I was so amazed and mesmerized by the local pharmacists. And it had really nothing to do with the fact that he was prescribing drugs. What I loved about him is he was so nice and he knew all the customers and he was there to be helpful, and you felt good when you saw him and he knew your name, like all of those elements. And I'm like, I am the worst attention to detail. People would have died if I were a pharmacist. Really, it just told me that I love being with customers and doing customer service. But it cracked me up because I was on this whole career path because I wanted to be that guy. And if he would have been running the local grocery store, I would have wanted to do that because I just loved the energy I got from him and the way he interacted with people and made me feel every time I went in. So it's a very powerful activity to think about when you're doing that introspection, to think about what makes me so happy when I'm doing it, and less about what the job title is, but like, what are the work activities that you're doing that are fun and fuel you?
Yeah, I agree.
Fawn's making a weird face. What's jumping out at you? You're like,
that. I didn't know where we were going. Oh, okay. So when people are trying to make a change in their life, they often have a lack of confidence that they can move forward and do this. And a good example is someone that I know who I used to work with her, so I know how great she is at her job. But she works for some jerks now, and it really has crunch time because she's got to find something, and she lacks the confidence to move forward and do that. So what do you do to get people in the game when they've been beaten down some and have to do something to because the clock's ticking?
Yeah. I've been in this situation with some candidates who wanted to give up, or there's a litany of stories. The first thing I would tell people is you've got to imagine yourself on the other side, and that, like, pause and give yourself a picture that you're running toward, right? I mean, if you're going through hell, keep going, right? You've got to stop and like really believe that sometimes that's a vision board and sometimes it's a journal, and I can only speak for what works for me, but really imagine yourself on the other side. And then back into what does it take to get there? Well, you're not going to get there by snapping your fingers. You're going to have to keep slogging along. And then, enlist help if you can, right? Find your team who will keep you accountable, folks who will work on your resume, if you've got, most folks have access to the internet these days, and you can really start to look at, okay, let me do a quick behavioral assessment. Let me find some ways to tell my story. Folks can explore with ChatGPT right now. Like, I'm a teacher who really loves working with people, but I want to make more money. And I'm actually was a CS major in undergrad. What do you think I should do? Ask ChatGPT. Like,
are you serious? I'm going to do that right now.
I'm not saying it's going to have the answer for you, but what I am suggesting is that some getting thinking about something maybe you didn't think about, right? And so leverage the technology, right? Spoken as someone who works in tech and I'm biased. I admit it. Oh,
okay.
What happened? What are you getting? I love this.
Oh, I'm waiting to see. It's giving
Fawn's
me
about to quit podcasting with me, and she's going to go off and
it's telling me I need to do a self-assessment. Start by I want the answer. No, I don't want to know. It's telling me I need to seek a mentor, be open-minded, build a personal brand, be persistent. I want to say, no, what job should I apply for?
This is good.
Now it's telling me how to select a specific job.
Oh my God.
I don't think that chat's in the mood.
We got to work on your how to write the question.
Maybe.
What? It says, I'm a former journalist and best-selling author. I want a new career path. What should I do? This is what it's telling me.
Well, it's interesting because it's kind of telling you what I was telling you. Like, you've got to do the work to figure out what gives you energy and who you are. And we do behavioral assessments, right? We have a great partnership with Hogan where we do psychometric assessment. One of the parts of that is to tell people about what they value. And it really helps. Some people really value making money. Other people don't, right? And so the sooner you can really get clear on what your values are, and that's, nobody can tell you that. You can use a psychometric assessment to help, but that'll help you align. And so if you say, you know what, I really love tradition, for example, I like to know that I'm going to show up at 9, I'm going to punch in, I'm going to do this is my rhythm, and then at 5, I'm going to be done. So you have a baseline for what works for you in your life. You have to sit and talk to yourself about that.
Well, so I love that, talking about just understanding your values and what it is you want. And that leads me to, whenever you're talking to the recruiter, you're further along and it's now time to talk salary. How can you use that in negotiation conversations around perks, salary? What's some advice you would give to a candidate?
Laws are changing in every state around salary, right? And so typically, it's great to have your expectation, right? Go into the conversation being very clear about what you need to make and why. And so it's unlikely that, you'll be able to say, well, I think $300,000 makes sense. Right. Explain why. Yeah, right? I've been in a scenario where I've had someone ask for $200,000 more than we initially talked about. And it came right out of left field. And I was like, that's interesting. Yeah. So my guidance is to really do some research as well. There is so much information available online. And in many cases, ranges of salaries are published. So do some research and come into it with a level of conviction that it gives you the confidence. Fawn, going back to your discussion around confidence, being able to say, I've seen the following things, I've talked to the following people, here's what I'd like to land, having a succinct point of view on that. There's nothing worse than someone who's like, well, I don't know, I've been told never to go first. Nobody, that's not helpful for anybody.
Yeah. What about other perks that you could negotiate in? Let's say they can't make your salary requirements. I mean, do you think companies are pretty open to those things? Like whether it's flexibility in hours or extra vacation or, I don't know, training, of going to conference, those types of things?
Yes, it really depends on the company. There are things that folks often can negotiate. Benefits are benefits, especially at a big company. I would say it's really hard sometimes to change the system, if you will, and what exists. But you certainly can negotiate things like sign-on bonus, and again, explaining why. It depends on the company. It's tough to give a direct answer on that one, I would say.
Well, that's fine. I mean, it's worth
I think
exploring during those conversations. I think people forget that there's other things they could ask for that maybe they get so hung up on salary where really they could make some concessions there and do, get benefits elsewhere.
Yeah. I would say some things where folks could get concessions, negotiating start dates, right? I'm going to need a month off before I start something new. That's something. Thinking about vacation is another one in some cases, but it's just so different by employer that I almost hesitate to even say, because ultimately,
everybody's different.
And oh, by the way, the best answer on that is that's the right answer for you to be asking. What are the trade-offs? If I can't make as much money in this role as I might like to, what are the other things that come with it? Does it mean I might have more vacation? Or does it mean that I could have a larger sign-on bonus? Or, is there more restricted stock if my cash flow is smaller in the short run? Just there's a variety of things. I would say the coaching I would give people is ask the question, because it's worth it.
Good advice.
Yeah, it's just so different by every company, every industry, and small companies, have different policies than big companies. And private equity has different rules than publicly traded companies. So it's worth probing.
Well, you went through, in your own story, you went through that itch, knowing that something had to change. What were some of those signs because there's a lot of people in that place. What were some of the signs for you, or that you see with your clients that, am I just bored, or is this time to really make a change?
Yeah. Well, I think you can go to the very dramatic side of things where something happens that is life-changing or that really jars folks in a way where they absolutely know they have to make a change. Or there's a scenario where someone's curious. Oh, you know what? Or someone said I might try this. And so they do. I spoke with a woman recently who her words were, I said, why did you decide to make a change? It's so different. You've been working for the same company so long. And she said, I woke up and I didn't recognize myself. I didn't know who I was anymore. And I said, oh, I've been there.
Wow, that's...
And so for me, that was one of my experiences. I think COVID is also, the pandemic has given many of us a different perspective on our relationship with work and how do we want to operate in this world. Many people deciding, I just spoke to a candidate the other day who said, I will not relocate. I know how to do my job here in my home office, and I'm now open to relocation. And if that's not okay, then I'll find a job where I can stay here. So I say that because I think the pandemic has given folks a perspective, many, about what they care for and what they value. So,
are you having trouble placing people who only want remote jobs?
It depends, but yeah. In some ways, yes. In some positions, I advise folks that it is worth being in contact with your peers, your peer group. I have bias because I love being in person. So I always say, hey, if you can afford a few days a week with your team. I think the data also shows that folks are able to get more done in person, collectively. Maybe not as an individual, but if you're on a whiteboard, for example, with 4 colleagues in a conference room, you need to map something out. It gets that there is something about being together that really can drive things forward quickly. But back to your question, Michelle, I would say I stopped recognizing myself, right? I was looking up and looking out and thinking, what do I want to be like? Who do I want to be when I grow up? I felt that. And I've used education and to pivot my career twice now. So I went back to school and did a master's in organizational psychology, which is what brought me into the work. At Russell Reynolds, our purpose is to improve the way the world is led. And so I say that I get to do that every day, one person at a time. So it's a gift, truly, but I spent a lot of time thinking about what mattered to me, what gave me energy, what did I need to do to make the change, who did I need to be, who did I need to leave behind so I can move forward, right? What served me in the past, definitely it's not always going to serve me in the future. So making those tough calls, right?
Well said. And I think that's obviously what makes you a great recruiter or executive recruiter, is because you walked in the shoes of the client and you have the perspective of the companies that you are representing. And I think that just some really great nuggets out of this. I think that a few things really stood out for me was the great advice of be able to articulate what you've delivered and why, and the learning you got from those experiences. I appreciated you talking about just the need to be open to feedback, and then, have the courage to ask your recruiter for feedback in the process, because it's only going to get you better positioned and prepared for your possible what's next, and give you the confidence that when you go inside and really think about who you are and what you want, and you start getting that picture together, then that empowers you to take the right steps in order to make that idea and concept that's in your head now becomes what you're living. So I think just thank you for the reminder there. And then you had a couple of other things too. You talked about being, whenever you're introspective, right? Just knowing what is it that brings you energy, and spend some time really digging in and unpacking that. And then make sure you surround yourself with the people that are going to help move you forward, and you will not lose. You're positioning yourself to win. I'm just so glad you came today to drop some of those nuggets of wisdom.
The hard one
today. So do you want people sending their resumes to you?
Well, what do they do? How do they keep in touch?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, and yeah, I love a resume. So reaching out on LinkedIn, it's always a great option. And you can also find me on the Russell Reynolds webpage as well. So that's a great way you can get in touch with me there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining the Hard Won Wisdom podcast with best-selling author Fawn Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Join us weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network. Visit hardwonwisdom.com for more on this podcast and for links to Fawn and Michelle's web pages and social media. Also, be sure to rate, subscribe, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort, and we'll see you next week.